Hello everyone, this is Darlene with Digital Photo Mentor, and today I'm going to be editing subscriber and follower photos to show you my process and how I approach image editing. If you want to participate, we do this live every single week. Look in the description below the video and you can use the form to submit your images and your questions. So today I'm going to be going through various different kinds of images. Let's get started. If you're new to the Digital Photo Mentor channel, please remember to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. Okay, so I am inside of, can everybody hear me okay? I'm just testing a new microphone setup. I want to make sure that you can all hear me okay. I'm inside of Lightroom and you should see my Lightroom here. I see Nigel. Nigel's here every week. Welcome. Marguerite, she's here often as well. Excellent. A couple of new folks. Stuart from Pensacola. You find the catalog part confusing. Well, maybe I can help you a little bit with that today, Stuart. I am going to be using a combination of Lightroom and Luminar. So right now I've got a few images that I've selected for working on today inside of Lightroom. And as Rob mentioned in the chat, we're going to be going a little bit shorter today because I have something to go to an event this afternoon. So I've gotten a few different kinds of images this week because people are saying they wanted to see something other than landscape photos. And the challenge is that I can only edit what I receive. So I've got this one here that I received from Steve. He's a local in my city and he's part of the Images Alberta Camera Club. So if you are in Alberta, check out that group. It's Images Alberta Camera Club. I can, maybe Rob can share the link to their website or their Facebook page. So what Steve sent me was a Aurora picture, and I'm going to reset this because I wanted to see if I could bring out the Aurora and the stars a little bit more with the processing inside of Lightroom. So what I did, I just reset it so you could sort of see that's what I ended up with. And I'm going to show you how I got there. Okay, so the first thing I generally do is change the profile. Okay, so the camera profile. If this is not something that you're used to seeing, this is up here at the top of Lightroom. And if you are inside of Luminar, I have that as well. And I'll just kind of show you where to find that. If you're inside of Luminar, the profile is under the light panel. Okay, so notice it doesn't recognize for this camera, so I'd have to go and load it. Okay, so Lightroom already recognized the camera. No, not in this one either. Okay, so I'm not sure what camera Steve is using. Let's see, he's using a Pentax K5. Okay, so it's possible that Lightroom and Luminar haven't recognized this camera, right? But it's suggesting a few different other Adobes. I can check and see what different profile, how the image changes. So look, just by putting my mouse over top of these different profiles, this one gives me a lot more color. So I'm going to choose that one, and that's the Adobe Landscape. Right? The next thing I'm going to do is straighten it because the horizon is a little bit crooked. So I'm just going to go into the crop tool, and you can get to that here or by clicking R on your keyboard. I use a lot of keyboard shortcuts. And I'm going to try the auto and see how it does, right? So I'm looking at, is the horizon sort of straight, and try to look at the verticals of the building, and that looks pretty good. I want to have a bit more sky. I want to make sure not to cut off that aurora. And then I'm just going to hit enter to accept that crop. Okay, so now we've got a little bit straighter landscape, and I might actually go back and just take a little bit off the bottom because we don't really need to see the ground. Okay, the reason I'm doing that is the further away or the more foreground you have, excuse me, I'm trying not to sneeze. The more foreground you have, it feels like, sorry guys, I know there was a sneeze in there. The more foreground you have, it feels like the subject is farther away. So I'm just going to come in a little bit. I want to leave a little bit of foreground like that. And now I want to work on the color. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is give a little bit more blue, because the sky in the background here, the night sky, should be a bit bluer. So I'm going to adjust that with the temperature slider. Okay, so now you can see that the blue is coming out of the sky, and I'm going to give it a little bit more magenta as well. Okay, now if I go too far, the green in the Aurora goes away. So I want to be conscious of adding more green or adding more magenta. I think I'm going to stick with, actually I'm going to go about there. Okay, so I've lowered the tint, so adding more green, and I'm going to go a little bit farther. So I'm just eyeballing this so that I'm getting more of that blue in the sky and more of that green in the Aurora. Okay, let's try there. The next thing I want to do is turn on my clipping warnings. So I want to see if anything is clipping, and I can do that in Lightroom also by holding the Alt Option key when I click these various different sliders, right? If you've watched some previous videos in the last few weeks, I do a little trick where I hold the Shift key and double click on the word whites and the word blacks, and what that does is it sets the endpoints, okay? And I've done that here again, and I'm just going to double check. So what I'm looking for is, are any of the areas in the highlights clipping? Okay, if I go really far, you'll see that anything that shows up here that's not black is clipping with no detail. So I actually want to take this a little bit farther because the stars are pretty bright. I want them to show up. Okay, now you see what this does is it actually makes the whole image brighter. Okay, I'm going to add a bit more black. I generally like to have some black clipping because what that does is it increases the overall contrast of the image, gives it more punch and more color saturation. Okay. Now I'm just going to play with the highlight slider a little bit. I can bring that down and you can see that that's affecting sort of the glow and maybe the exposure. Okay, so remember, exposure affects midtone. So that's going to be that sky part, but not the Aurora part. So I might bring the sky a little bit darker, but leave the Aurora brighter. And now that I've got it, I'm going to tweak the color again. Okay, so I'm always playing with this color. That looks pretty good. So I find that editing is a little bit of a dance. You do one thing and then you want to come back and do another. Like this one slider will affect a certain part of the image, and then any previous edits you've done, you may have to revisit. Okay, so let's take a look at this is the before. So there was a lot of sort of red tone in the image. We've removed that and shifted towards blue and green, and now the Aurora really stands out more, as do the stars. Okay, so if you're watching, I hope that gives you some idea, because we talked about doing astrophotography and bringing out the stars a little bit more. Okay, let me just grab the next image. Okay, I'm going to mute myself for a second here, so just bear with me because I've got to deal with my sniffly nose. Okay, I am back and less sniffly now. Sorry about that. All right, so what else could I do here? We could take a look at the one thing you want to be careful when you're dealing with astrophotography, and I just want to look at his settings here. Okay, so ISO 3200, and that's really typical of a night or whenever you're trying to shoot something with the night sky. Okay, so there is a fair bit of noise here, but you want to be careful of using too much denoise, okay? Because what will happen is, I'm just going to use a couple of presets here to show you. What will happen is the program is looking for white speckles to remove them. So in this case, the stars look like white speckles. So I'm just going to take the noise reduction down to an extreme, right? So notice if I hover over these presets, you'll actually see what it's going to get, right? So when I do the denoise really high, right, it actually starts to remove some of the stars. So I tend to keep the noise reduction a little bit lower, okay, on this, and just deal with the noise a bit. Okay, so there's what I would have as my final image. Now, if I wanted to go a little farther, we can go into the HSL panel and play with the colors in here. Okay, so HSL stands for hue, saturation, and luminance, as you can see by this menu here. And what you can do is you can actually shift the hue or the tint. So I'm going to click on this little targeted adjustment tool, and I'm just going to play with shifting the greens. Okay, so look at that. If I shift the green to a little bit more yellow, that looks good. And let's see what happens if I try and pick up some of this pink over here. Okay, so I could pick up a little bit more pink in the sky that way as well. Right, then we can even play with the saturation if we want to give the green, punch it up a little bit more, something like that. Right, and then of course luminance. Okay, so if we want to darken it or brighten it, okay, so we can punch up the aurora that way. So let's take a look at it before this tool and just use this little toggle here. It looks like a little light switch. Okay, so it's ever so subtle, but it's just punching up those greens in the aurora a little bit, right? So this is the advantage of living in Alberta. Even though we have very cold winters often, you do get to see the northern lights. So I don't know where he photographed this, but I'm sure it's probably within an hour or so of Edmonton, which is where I live. So let me have a look. Is there any questions about that? Does anybody else here do night photography or astrophotography? I think we probably have some articles on that on the website if you'd like to share that, Rob. Yes, there's an article on Northern Lights. That's perfect. Okay, Lightroom keyboard shortcuts. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next one. I'm going to come back to your question, Stuart, about the catalog in a moment. Okay, so I want to show a couple of image edits. I do want to mention to a couple of people, if you're either here live or watching this later, this one is by Mark Cartwright. The images that you sent, or at least this one here, has already been edited and it's grayscale, it's black and white, so I can't really do anything with it. And it's a JPEG and it's a fairly small file. Let me take a look at the file size. Yeah, it's only 1800 by 3600 pixels, so it's not the full camera image and it's already edited. Right? Same thing with this one here. This one is really cropped into a small 800 pixel image in black and white. So I need to have the original image out of camera, even if that was a JPEG, exactly how you shot it, right? It's for me to be able to work on it. Right? Same thing with Marty's images. These are already edited. You've got your watermark and you've converted them already to grayscale, and there's no metadata in here, so I can't tell what the shooting settings were or any of that. So please, just a reminder, if you're submitting your images, to send the original camera files, even if that's a JPEG. I want the unedited original JPEG as you shot it. Okay. Let's move on to something different, because people are saying there's too many landscape photos. So this is an image by Holly. She may be with us today. Are you there today, Holly? And this looks like this little young, maybe hawk that she photographed somewhere. And it looks like he's maybe in a bird sanctuary or something. And how I would approach this one. Okay, so the same process. I'm going to start. Actually, I'm going to go over to Luminar because Holly is a Luminar user. So I want to do her image over here. Right, so in Luminar, my workflow is slightly different. If I'm working completely in Luminar, I'm actually going to start with templates. And when you follow along this workflow at the top and you go from catalog to templates, it gives you a suggested number of templates that it thinks is going to look good on this image, okay? So now you'll notice the first collection that's been suggested is animal friends. So it's pretty smart. The program's AI, or artificial intelligence, inside of Luminar AI is picking up that there's an animal or a creature in this image. So I'm just going to go through the options here and see if I like any of these, okay? So far, I'm liking that one. That one's not too bad. And what I want to do with this guy is I want to really bring out his feathers and sharpen them. Okay, let's see what that's doing. Okay, that's making it really nice and warm. Right, so that looks good. Bitter cold is going to give you something cool, or on the blue tone. That's kind of a nice result as well. I'm liking this warming one so far. Okay, so it's not bringing out too much of the background and keeping it soft. So I'm going to start with this one. And as I mentioned, the workflow of left to right inside of Luminar AI, go from the catalog to templates, pick something that you like that's close to sort of what you had envisioned for that image. And if you don't know what you had envisioned, just try the ones that have been suggested and see what you come up with, like, as I did here. Then we can move into the edit module. And I'm going to do some things like I want to make sure that I'm cropping out this part on the left here, and I want to make sure that his feathers are sharpened up, okay, without sharpening the background. Okay, so I'll show you how to do that. So let's take a look at what's been done. The first thing I'm going to do, you could see anything that's been applied in the template is got a little dot beside it. Okay, so you can go in and edit any of those. But I want to make sure that I crop that side out. So I'm going to open the Composition AI tool. And Luminar AI, if you use this purple button here, will give you a composition suggestion. Okay, so what I find is that it often does a good suggestion, but I have to move it around. Okay, in this case, I'm actually going to switch it up and go free, because I want to make sure that I have all the space above his head, that I'm not cutting his feet off. And I would have preferred to see a little bit more space below when in the shot itself, but it's not there, so we're just going to work with that. And I'm going to put him right about there so he's off center. Okay? Hit enter to accept the crop. So right away, just with a template and a quick crop, we've gone from that, which is a little bit cool, to that. So notice how warming up the image really brings out the brown in his feathers. Okay? Now something here has been applied, the details have been applied. So a little bit of sharpening has been added. I'm going to add a little bit more, and I'm going to punch up the medium details and zoom in a little bit. So what I want to look for is how is it affecting his feathers and his face, because that's what I really want to sharpen. Okay, I'm going to bring up the small details. So small details should pick up all of these little feathers. Okay, so see what happens here. Okay, I'm taking it to an extreme just to show you, but it's doing a nice job. So I'm going to raise it to, let's say, about 25 or 30 on the small details, and let's see about medium details. Okay, that's picking up sort of some stuff in his face and more of the spine of the feathers, so I like that. Again, another tip that I've given in previous lives, if you've watched, is that I often take sliders to an extreme and then I come back in the middle somewhere. Okay, so take it to the extreme to see what it's doing and then come back. Okay, now what's happening here is if I turn this off and on, okay, it's affecting the entire image. So I don't want to affect the background, and it hasn't for the most part because there's no small details there. So that's one of the great things about using this tool inside of Luminar as opposed to, say, Clarity inside of Lightroom or Photoshop, because it's actually choosing the details small, medium, large. If I go large, you'll see that it starts to pick up some stuff in the background. So I could actually take that the opposite direction and do minus on the large details. But I'm going to mask him here just to make sure that he's the only thing being sharpened. Okay, so I'm going to open the mask tool, and that's this little guy in the middle here. Okay, this is undo. This is toggle off and on. Okay, so the mask tool is here, and once it opens, I have the option of painting it, doing a radial mask, or doing a gradient mask. Okay, so painting, I can just paint it in where I want it. Radial Mask draws a circle and I can move it around. And a Gradient Mask comes in from the edge as like a graduated filter. So in this case, I'm going to use Radial Mask because I want to just affect him. Let's change the shape. And I want to make slightly less fade. So then I'm just going to make it larger and make sure that it's on him. Maybe not quite that large. Just like that. So it's on the bird, okay? So there's sort of more sharpening up top here and less sharpening on the bottom currently. So let's see how that's doing then. Let's zoom in. And I want to make sure that I've got the mask on the right thing, because if you invert the mask, which is what I actually did here, so I've gotten the mask incorrect. So I'm masking the wrong parts, okay? So all I need to do here is open it again and just do invert. Okay, so once I've inverted it, now you can see that this feathers are much sharper. Let's just go to 50%. Okay, once that loads, I'm just going to turn it off. Okay, so take a look at the feathers in the body of the bird when I turn that on. Okay, so it's doing a really nice job. One more thing I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the mask. So I've opened it again. I'm going to copy with these little 3 dots and then copy. And then I'm going to go up to the structure tool and I'm going to apply minus structure because I want to fade this background out a little bit, and it's kind of like making a fake bokeh. Okay, so I'm going to go minus structure and maybe even boost it a little bit. So now you can see what it's doing is it's sort of softening overall, but I don't want to soften the bird. So I'm going to paste the mask in, so the 3 dots, paste. Now remember that's going to apply this filter or this tool where I have masked it out. So I'm actually applying it to the bird instead because that's where I did the other one. So in this case, I want to invert it again and apply it to the background. Okay, so now can you see what's happening? If I turn this guy off, okay, look at the background. It's just kind of giving it a more softened effect. So I can even take it farther so you can see what it's doing. Right? So see how that's sharpening, leaving the bird sharp, and softening the background. Right? Now, if I wanted to pick it up a little bit because I've kind of not gotten all of him, I can go back in and paint and make sure that I get his feet and all of his feathers. Okay, now I'm painting in the wrong thing. Okay, I want to erase. Okay, so I'm erasing this blur from his feet. There we go. Maybe a little bit down here as well. Okay, so let's do another before and after. Okay, so there's the before image. A little bit blue, so it's kind of cold, not real punchy. Right, now he really stands out. And the only thing else I would probably do is just add a quick vignette on here. And if you see my vignette technique, turn it down dark, put the feather to 0 so you can see the edge of the vignette. I'm going to change it so it's more round. I'm going to make it smaller. And then I'm going to position it on the bird. Okay, so this is something that you cannot do in Lightroom with the post-crop vignette tool. If you wanted to do something similar, you would have to use the radial filter. Okay, so then I'm just going to put the feather back. Okay, so now the edge of the vignette is softer, and then lessen the amount. Right? There we go. So that is the finished image of our bird. I'm going to hop back over here. Now, actually, I'm going to try something else because inside of Luminar, no, it's not recognizing his face. I was hoping that it would pick up his face because I wanted to lighten his eyes a little bit, but it's not recognizing the bird face as a human face. Okay, so I'm going to hop back over to Lightroom and see if we have any questions. How are we doing here? Everybody's quiet today. For those of you that are attending live, please tell me if you picked something up from that tutorial or from the first 2 with the bird and the Aurora. If you've picked anything up regarding processing nature photos or animals or critters, or night photos if that's something that you photograph. Okay, the next image I've got is an image from Chris Lord, and he was in Italy with me and Ugo a year ago, basically at the Venice Carnival when all of this pandemic stuff went down. And he sent me this image of Cinque Terre in Italy, and I'm very jealous that he was there. So I've done a little bit of pre-editing on this one. Let me show you what I've done. All right, so the original image was a little bit dark, but not really underexposed. It's exposed well for the sky and keeping detail, and it's very blue, right? So what I've done, I'm just gonna undo and show you what I've done here a little bit. So I've applied that camera profile, okay? So he's shooting with a Sony camera, and Lightroom picked up the fact that he's got Sony, so I could pick vivid if I want a little bit more color. And I chose deep because it gave me sort of this nice rich tones. So I've changed that. I've also increased the white balance. Okay, so the original white balance, I'll just put it back here, was very blue. So what I did was I chose shade. Okay, so shade, what happens is the white balance, when you choose the white balance in camera or here in the processing stage later, and that's available because this is a raw file, right? Shade is very blue, so what's going to happen is the software is applying like a yellow filter to compensate for how much blue is in the image. Okay, so this is in fact shot in the shade, but I also want to make it even warmer than that because I want to pick up the colors in that sunset a little bit. And it looks a little bit green to me, so I'm going to add a little bit more pink. Okay, so right away you can see that just doing the color has really improved it. The other thing that I did was I lowered the highlights. Okay, so there's lots of highlights in the sky here that were a little bright, so I just wanted to bring those down. And I increased the blacks and whites using that same shift double click and added a tiny bit of clarity. Okay, so now there's one thing that I will mention here, and I'm hoping that Chris has cleaned his sensor since then because there's a lot of spots on here. Right? So this could be either spots on the filter or spots on his sensor. Okay? Because this was shot at f/22, if you have any dirt on the front of your lens, that's going to show up more so than if you're shooting wide open. Okay? So he shot f/22 probably because he wanted to get a long exposure and pick up like cloud movement and ocean movement. So those are great creative choices when shooting. But the f/22 has really picked up all of this dirt. Okay, so I'm not going to go through and clone all of this out for him, but just make note that if you're seeing this kind of thing on your images, you really need to clean your sensor, right? So whether that be yourself or take it to somebody that does that. Okay. I've also cropped this image a fair bit. The original image was like this. I'll just show you. Okay, so the original image is fairly crooked. You could see the horizon here, and when I chose auto inside of the crop tool, it didn't really do a good job. It couldn't find the horizon. Okay, so I used the ruler tool and placed it. You just click the ruler and you get this little thing that looks like a little crosshairs. Choose it, place the first part over on the horizon on the right, and then I'm clicking and dragging to make this line. Okay, so the longer I make it, the more accurate it's going to be, and I want to make sure that it fits on the horizon, and then let go. Okay, so that will straighten whatever I put the ruler on, and then I just came in a little bit tighter overall because I wanted to see a little bit less on the bottom and a little bit more of that sky, because for me the image is about this town and this dramatic sky. Okay, so now we've come in a lot closer, and I might even come in a little bit more on the bottom, but I like this sort of, let's go free here. I might even come in a little bit more on the bottom, so we're focused more on this village itself and the sky, like that. Maybe a little bit less. Okay, then the next thing I did was I applied two different graduated filters. Okay, so remember I said graduated filters come from the edge of the image, either up or down. Okay, so where this one is applying is on the bottom of the image, and it's adding exposure, shadows, and minus a little bit of blacks. Okay, so that's what that one is doing. And then I've added a second one on the sky. And both of these, I have used a luminosity mask or a range mask here at the bottom of the tool to only apply it to the dark areas in case of the bottom part, because I didn't want to brighten the sky. So this graduated filter, actually let me just delete these and I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so that's what it looks like before the graduated filters. Okay, so I wanted to brighten the town and the ocean without brightening the sky. Okay, so I'm going to add a graduated filter. Just click double click on the word effect and it will reset all the sliders. So I'm going to increase the exposure and the shadows. Okay, and we'll see how that goes. So I'm going to drag from the bottom. Okay, so when you click and drag, you get these 3 lines. And the more I go while I'm holding it, it spreads them out, so it's more of a fade. Now in this case, I'm not so concerned about that because I'm going to use the luminosity mask to only apply it where I want it. Okay, so I'm going to bring it up, make sure I adjust the angle here so I'm getting all of this part. Okay, but you can see that it's affecting the sky as well, and I don't want that to happen. Okay, I think I'm going to increase the whites a little bit. Okay, so increasing the whites will actually punch up that image like it did on the base image. And I'm going to add even a little bit of warmth here. So you can do multiple different things with this one filter. Okay. Down at the bottom, I'm going to turn on the range mask to luminance. Okay, so range mask allows me to say, okay, I don't want this to apply to either the bright or the dark areas. So in this case, the range here goes from black on the left to white on the right. I'm going to bring the white slider down. Oh, I got to grab it. And as I do that, you can see that it's starting to remove the filter. So where it's red is where it's applying. It's starting to remove the filter from the sky. So that's what I want to have happen. Okay. And I don't want it to really affect the water and so on. So let's see how that looks. Okay, so now you can see that it's blended that filter so that it's really only applying to those bottom areas. Now, if I didn't want it to apply to the sky, right, I could keep going with the range mask here. But what I'm seeing happening is it's now cutting off on the water. And actually that's not bad, but I do want it to still apply on the buildings of the city. So I'm going to leave it a little bit higher, and I can actually go in and use the brush tool. So the brush is part of the graduated filter, okay? And then I can erase any of the bits that I don't want. Okay, so I'm just going to go and erase from this area here, because I don't want it on the sky. Okay. So it's still going to apply on the city, but not on this part of the sky. Right? And how I got this overlay to show was just clicking O on my keyboard. And if it's not green or if it's a different color, just hold Shift and tap O a few times and you'll get it to change color. So I usually use the green or the red because I can see it the best. Right? Closing up the graduated tool. Okay, so now you can see I've made a halo. Okay, so if you're doing the brushwork like I just did, make sure that you come in a little closer because I need to fix that. Okay, so you could see I've made this halo here. So what I'm going to do is when I paint with the brush this time, I'm going to use what's called Auto Mask. Okay, and Auto Mask will help me find the edges of things. So if I come in real close here, and ideally I should be doing this at a smaller, more zoomed in view. Okay, so I'm still, I was painting. Okay, so I want to make sure that I'm erasing. I've got Auto Mask. Okay, let's go again. So always double check your settings because even though I thought I was erasing, I was actually painting. Okay, let's see how that's doing. So if I just turn off the overlay, okay, you can see that I'm doing a better job here, and that's with that Auto Mask. Okay, so I'm getting in to these smaller areas because you don't want a halo around the city. Right? So that is better. Still not perfect. I would probably do a much better job of painting that, but for the purposes of demonstration, you get the idea. I'm going to add one more graduated filter, and I'm going to do that one from the top. Okay. Now notice that it applies the settings that I did last. Okay, so I'm just going to undo that, double click on effect. So I'm going to lower the highlights, and I'm going to punch the contrast a little bit and the clarity. Okay, so that's going to help bring out that sky. And I'm going to do the same thing, masking it, but opposite this time. All right, let's have a look. So this time I'm going to mask it off the dark areas. And I'm going to bring it down a little farther so I get the whole sky. So see, I'm not really concerned about accuracy because I'm using this luminosity mask to make sure that it's not on the city. Right? Can you see that? So when I turn this guy off, right, so this is what it's doing. I could apply some color as well. I can make it more blue. I can make it more pink. Okay, so we can really fine tune the sky this way. Okay, like so. I'm really not liking that mask that I did over here, so I'm just going to basically undo my bad masking. Okay, so let's just put it back here. So I'm undoing my poor masking that I did on this filter. All right, let's see how that is. Check my luminosity. Okay, so my other option is I could actually go farther with this slider and then use that brush that I just had, the paint brush, to paint it into these areas down here. Okay. All right, let's just go with that. Okay, so another quick before and after. So it's done a really nice job. I've had to use what's called local adjustments. That's what the graduated filter is all about. Okay. And what I would do from here is I would probably pull this into Luminar and punch up some of the colors, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop over to Luminar and I'm going to go find this image because what I did was I already sort of did a pre-process on this one just using a Luminar template, right? So what I did was I looked for a template that would work really well, and the hyperdrive one picked it up nicely, and then I just tweaked it a little bit. So I'm just going to go back here to hyperdrive. So right out of the box, that's what the template gave me. Okay, so from before to after, and that's without any of the masking and filtering that I did inside of Luminar, okay, or inside of Lightroom. Okay, so what I did afterwards is I did a little bit more tweaking of the color and the contrast. Okay, so keep in mind I haven't done any painting here. No painting, no masking. This is all applying to the entire image. Okay, so it's done what's a really nice job of applying a curve here. Okay, so I went to find out, okay, what is this template doing? And that's a good way to learn as well, because I was like, hey, this one is really punching up the sky and the city without having to do that masking. What is it doing? Okay, so I used the trick of looking at all the tools that have the dot next to them and just turn them on and off until you figure out which one is doing what. Okay, so super contrast, this one is really picking up the darks, right? And I could do something similar with the highlights as well. So look at the sky in this one. It's much more dramatic than it is in the Lightroom version, right? So let's just do that. And we might punch up the midtones a little bit because that's the middle of the image. Let's see how that's working. I'm going to lighten a little bit. And a quick before and after. So I'm always checking before and after on the tool, before and after of the whole image to make sure that I'm not going too far. Okay. You can really see the dirt here on the sensor now that I've punched up the contrast. Okay. So the only way to fix that would be to go and in here use the erase tool or the cloning tool inside of Lightroom. Okay. Again, it's crooked, okay? So the template didn't fix the tilt of the image, but I want to try the composition AI again and see what kind of suggested composition it gives me. Okay, so remember that Lightroom didn't fix the tilt, okay? So this is my suggested composition, and there's a button down here for tilt correction. So that would be like auto in Lightroom. And look at it found it, okay? So where Lightroom didn't find the tilt and be able to correct it, Luminar did. Okay, so once again, like I said, I find that the cropping, that's pretty much what I did in Lightroom, right? I just have to move it around a little bit. So I do find that the suggested crop often is really, really good. You just have to rearrange it a bit. Okay, so before and after. And I haven't done any sort of masking or anything. I might add a little vignette here. And there's a couple of my favorite tools inside of Luminar that I'm going to apply. And one of them is Mystical. So it gives this sort of really glowy effect to the image. So I'll apply it really strong so you can see it. Okay, so see how it's really kind of glowy, for lack of a better word. And I'm going to apply that to this image around 25, okay? And if I wanted, I could mask out the town, but I kind of like overall, actually a little farther, I kind of like the effect overall. And then I might go and play with a mood. So right now it's applying a LUT, which is called Hyperdrive. Okay, so let's see what that one is doing. So remember, toggle the tool off just to see what that tool is doing. Okay, so see what that's doing is it's shifting the color. So I could choose to enhance that if I want to and give it even more of that color, or increase the contrast because it's lowered the contrast. Or I can choose a different LUT or color table, okay? Lookup table, which is a color, like a cinematic grading, okay? So I can just do that by mousing over these and seeing how they look. Ooh, that one's quite nice. Long Beach. Look at the colors in the buildings there. So the color in the buildings on the little village and the sky almost match. Okay, that one's kind of cool. And I'm not going to do too many of these, but I think this Long Beach one works really well. And I'm just going to reset the contrast because I like the contrast. And I'm going to even punch it up more. Okay, so what it's doing is it's picking up this orange here and this orange here. So there's a lot of complementary colors in this image, so it works really well, right? The buildings are very sort of pinky orange, and the mountains, the water, and the sky are blue cyan, and those are opposite on the color wheel, right? So that they provide what's called a complementary color. Let me show you that actually. Okay, so color wheel. This is what your color wheel looks like. So I'm talking about colors that are in the blue cyan spectrum opposite these here. So yellows and oranges, right? So anytime you have colors that are opposite like that, they work really well together. Okay? So I'm pretty happy with how that image is turned out. Let's look at the before and after one more time. Right, now keep in mind this is just from Luminar, okay, so I could have pulled the Lightroom version into Luminar and added the finishing effects as well, but I actually wanted to see the difference of how quickly I could get to a similar look in Luminar, and I was able to get there quicker using that template that punched up the curves without using those graduated filters, okay, so and masking and painting and all that stuff, okay, so you'll notice that it punched up the hill and the sky and the buildings here really quickly without masking. Right? Let's move on to the next one. Okay, let me pop back over to Lightroom. Now let me answer Stuart's question a little bit because earlier, we have some questions. Okay. Would I consider putting catch lights into the bird's eyes? I think it's not an owl. Maybe it's an owl. I'm not sure. Whatever kind of bird it is. I think it's a falcon of some kind. I probably wouldn't put catch lights per se, but I might brighten his eyes. And I was hoping that the Luminar tool would pick that up, the portrait editing, but it didn't. So if I wanted to brighten his eyes, if you're using Lightroom, you can use a paintbrush or the adjustment brush, right? the adjustment brush set to a little bit of plus exposure, a little bit of plus shadows, and set the brush size to, I'm just resizing it to just smaller than the eye. And what I would do is just sort of paint it on the iris, right? Can you see that? I don't want to do the rest of his eye. Okay. See what that's doing? It's just brightening his eyes. So I would brighten his eyes without putting the catch lights, okay? Does that answer that question? Let's see. Did I miss any questions, Rob? I think I got the one. Oh, is it possible to add catch lights in Luminar AI? Okay, so 2 questions about the bird. Okay, so let me go back to Luminar AI. Adding catch lights. Yes. If I wanted to add just a catch light to the bird in here, I could do that with dodging and burning. Okay. I could do the same kind of thing. Oops. I could do the same kind of thing that I did in Lightroom here. And it's not so much as a catch light as it is. Oh. My computer is playing jokes on me. All right, come on. There we go. It doesn't want to zoom in. Get in there. All right. Dodge, zoom. Let's get his eyes. Okay, so dodging and burning allows you to selectively lighten or darken parts of the image. So I'm going to choose lighten, and I usually dial it down to around 10 to 15. So I'm gonna go slightly higher because I want to really see the effect on his eyes. And I want to have my brush, and I'm adjusting the brush size with the, I don't know if you guys can see the circles or not. Sometimes it shows up on the screencast and sometimes it doesn't. So you should be able to see a crosshairs and 2 circles, okay? So I want to make it just small enough to get the iris here, and I'm just going to paint into the iris and a little bit over on this side, okay? And I will generally layer this, so I'm doing it slowly, layer by layer. Okay, now if this was a human, okay, Anne asked about a human, I would do this with the portrait tool. And I know that that Skylum is working on getting the portrait AI to recognize animal faces as well. So that's something that they are working on, so that if it had picked up his eyes, and I'll show you that in another one, we could just lighten them in the portrait AI automatically. Okay, let's see if that's actually doing anything. Right, so yeah, you can see I've brightened his eyes using the dodge and burn tool. Okay, so same kind of idea that I did with the adjustment brush in Lightroom. Okay. I do have a person photo that I'm going to edit. We could probably do that one next. Let's have a look. Okay, actually, yes. So we've got one from Robert and one from Mike. I'll come back to the portrait one. So this one from Mike, oops. I was making an assumption that he wanted to know how to remove this. It looks like a hand up at the top of the image, like maybe he was covering something or shading something, or maybe rain from his lens. Okay, so I'm assuming that he wants to know how to get rid of that. Okay. So what I'm going to do is in Lightroom, I'm going to try it in both. So in Lightroom, I would use the clone and heal tool. So that's Q shortcut on the keyboard. And I'm literally just going to paint over the whole thing. So I just paint until I don't see it anymore. Okay. And what happens is Lightroom will choose a spot of where it's picking from. Okay, so if I pick the wrong spot, or if it picks the wrong spot, okay, for example, right, we don't want to have grass up in the sky, you can just move that spot around. So the source, okay, so it's going from here to here. Make sure that you're on heal, not clone, okay, because when you're dealing with clone, okay, so it clones exactly. Can you see that? When you're dealing with heal, it tries to blend the pixels into the target area from the source area, and it also takes into account the pixels around it. Okay, so you can see how different that looked. Okay, so Lightroom actually did a pretty good job, partly because this is a really easy one. It's just dark on white. If you're dealing with a more complex thing that you need to clone out, you may have to go to Photoshop. Okay, but let's take a look and see how Luminar does on that same one. Okay, so I'm going to go into Edit, and I'm just going to go straight to the Erase tool. Okay, so same kind of idea. I'm just going to paint over it, and let's just see how good a job it does. So I need to make sure that I get a little bit around the hand like that, because it needs to know what's the pixels around it are, because it's doing what's called content aware fill. Okay, so it's judging the content around the thing you're trying to erase and trying to fill the pixels with what it thinks should be there. Okay, so this is a highly intelligence or background intense process, so you'll see that it does take a minute, and boom, it did a really good job as well. Okay, so both of those did a great job erasing the hand. Right? If I want to continue editing, if I'm in Luminar, right, I'm going to go back to templates and see what it suggests for me. Okay, so now you'll notice it's suggesting scenery. Okay, so just like it knew that the bird was an animal, it knows that this is a scene. Okay, clear and sharp. Oh, that one's kind of nice. That really warmed it up. Okay, so I'm just clicking through to see. Okay, that's not going to work. So there's a sky replacement going on there. Let's just see. I think this one here. It gave it sort of the mist. It's picking up the mist and giving it a bit of a warmer feeling. This one was nice as well, but this one is warmer. Okay, so I'm going to go with that one. All right. And is this a DNG? I believe it is. Okay. And I can see what it's doing now. Okay, so it's doing enhance, it's doing sky enhancer. I don't think I need the sky enhancer. I'm just going to turn that off. Let's see what an accent AI is doing. This is a great tool, right? So it's trying to fill in the fog a little bit. If I wanted to do that even more, there's a tool down here under landscape. So this is what I'm looking at once I've applied the template, is which tools have been used and do I want to tweak them at all. Okay, so turning off the sky enhancer, I'm going to go look under landscape. Okay, so it's applied the golden hour slider, which gives it that yellow color and that warmth that I said it picked up. But let's try dehaze. Okay, so there's a dehaze slider in Lightroom as well. So dehaze is basically doing what I do when I add the blacks and make the blacks clipping, but it's doing it sort of in an automated way. Right? So if you want more control, you can do the same kind of idea just by increasing the blacks. Okay, so watch what happens. Okay, so I'm getting dehazed here. I'm gonna adjust the curve a little bit. I've got a video coming out on curves very soon. People are asking about curves, so I made one for you guys. So that's coming out soon. Okay, so that's helping. So you might have a combination of playing with these sliders up here in the light panel and the curves, and adding a bit of dehaze. Okay. So notice here that Luminar does recognize the camera profiles, so I could see if a camera profile gives me a better color. Okay. Let's go with landscape. And I'm not liking that pink tone so much, but let's see what's happening here. Under the color tool, there's a slider that's really great, and it's remove color cast. So as I slide this up here, you'll see that it's sort of removing any of the weird yellow or pink, but it's also brightening the image. I find that sometimes it darkens and sometimes it brightens, but often if I pull this up to about 10 or 15, any kind of weird color shift that I had in my image goes away. Okay, so if you're having trouble adjusting the color of your images using these sliders, try the remove color tint under that panel. Okay. I would actually leave most of the fog in this image because I like that it's really misty and mystical. Mystical? Mystical. Mysterious and mystical. Can't speak English today. And maybe we even want to add a little bit more of that I cannot speak English today. Mysterious glow under mystical. See how when I add that, right, it increases the fog. There's also a tool inside of Luminar that adds more fog, and that is the Atmosphere AI tool. Okay, so you can see there's fog, mist, layered fog, and I'm just going to add the amount to a whole bunch. So if I want more fog, right, you can see that I can actually increase the depth, meaning that as I bring this slider up, it's bringing the fog forward in the picture. Okay? We can play with the different ones, the layered fog, the mist. So if you want to put some mist in the foreground, right, and make it even more misty, you can use this one. Okay, I think we've got enough mist in this image, but just so you know, that tool is there if you want to add or enhance a little bit of mist. So I probably would crop this a little bit, and that's about all for this one. Let's see what Luminar suggests, and let's see if it's straight. Okay, so look at that. It did a really good job of finding the horizon and straightening it. And I would actually tend to agree with this crop. I would take a little bit off this side and a little bit off the top, maybe even just a tiny bit more. Okay. Because I do want to keep that horizon sort of a little bit off center, but I don't need all the stuff over on the left. So that's what I would do with that image. Thanks to Mike for sending that one in. All right, let's move down to the portrait one because somebody had asked about brightening up the eyes. Okay. Scrabble words. Can I add it to humans? Okay, awesome. What Scrabble words did you get, Anne? I'm getting lots of... Would you like another one? Circles of confusion? Or did you like my mystical words? Is that the ones you're talking about that I can't speak English today? Okay, so this is one of Bob's images. Bob came to India with me. Anne was there as well, actually. And this is a fellow that I seem to remember this guy, and I remember Bob photographing him. So let's see what we can do with this one in Luminar. I'm going to start with Luminar because I want to use that portrait AI. Okay, it's suggesting monochrome, which might work well here. Okay, experimental. I'm going to try essence. So these are just some basic portrait templates. Let's see what we can do to punch him up a little bit. Right. I actually don't mind the Rembrandt one because it's kind of softened. You can see that it's doing some body AI, and I'm going to come back to that one. But it's brightened him up, and it's given a nice color, so it's closest to what I'm looking for. So I'm going to start there. You can also, if you find that this template works but you don't want it as strong, you can just dial it down a little bit. Okay, so we can start there and then go edit. So I know I want to straighten this one. I'm not so sort of pedantic about straightening portraits and leaving things tilted, but because of this strong vertical here, it looks a bit odd tilted. So let's just see what happens when we correct that tilt. Okay, that looks pretty close, maybe even a little bit more. I do like Bob's cropping, and the nice thing about correcting this tilt here is it's eliminated this other person's knee over on the left and a good chunk of this guy's arm over here, and we're going to fix those a bit more as well. But I do like his composition where he's got lots of space above the man's head. Okay, so that's a little bit different. It's giving him lots of height. So let's stick with that composition, straightened. And let's see what it's applied here. Okay, so it's applied Enhance AI, which is probably correcting some of those brightness issues. Yes, it is. It's applied a bit of a denoise. Okay, so that's probably softening. And I know that it has applied a softening of some kind, and that's the glow here. Okay, so for this particular one, I'm actually going to turn that off or undo it. So this little back arrow is undo, because I want him a little bit sharper. Okay, if it was a female, maybe I would want some glow, but for him, I don't want so much glow. Right? It's also applied this high key filter, which is brightening the outside and brightening the overall picture. Okay, it's not doing a whole lot. It's very subtle. Let's see what happens if I crank it up. Okay, so it's actually removing some of the color overall. So let's leave it where it was. And let's take a look at the eyes and the portrait AI that you guys were asking about. Okay, So one thing I want to do first is turn off this body AI because I knew it was sharpening. Oh, we did that already. Okay, so let's leave that. If we want to slim him, you could see that this will affect the body, right? So it just kind of squishes in, but in a weird way on this particular one because of his arms, right? All right, face. We want to look at those eyes, right? So there's a couple of things I can do here. I can use the face light slider, and you can see what that does is it finds the circle of the face, and literally it's like adding a reflector, okay? So I'm going to lighten him a little bit because the overall image was dark, but I want attention to his face, right? Under the eyes, if you don't see this one, just click the little down arrow. Okay, I'm going to zoom in here so we can see his eyes better. Let's go 50%. So iris visibility and eye enhancer are two things that are going to punch up his eyes. So I'm going to go to extreme just to see what it's doing. And iris flare. Okay, so iris flare adds a little lightening at the bottom. Right. Let's see what this tool is doing if I turn it off. So it's lightening his face and it is lightening his eyes a little bit. But I'm actually going to show you another trick. And there's a video that I did on Portrait AI eyes tools in Luminar AI, if you could share that one. I'm going to change the color of his eyes here, okay? But I'm not actually going to change it. I'm going to change it to his eye color. So he has brown eyes, and I'm just going to choose brown under iris color and see what happened, okay? So now his eyes are really standing out more, okay? So this iris visibility punches up the color, okay? So I want to increase that a little bit. So what I've done is I've used that eye replacement color to give him his own eye color, but to be able to punch it up a little bit more. And I find that that works really well, particularly for people that have dark brown eyes that look really dark in the original picture, okay? I could use the circle remover to soften the dark circles under his eyes a little bit. And I don't think he needs eyebrow enhancement. He's got lots of eyebrows. See how it's darkening his eyebrows, right? So I could give him a little bit of darkening eyebrows. We could also whiten his eyes a little bit. Be careful that you don't go too far with this one, or if you're doing teeth whitening. Okay, if you go too far with the eye whitening, it looks like they end up being a devil person. Okay, so be careful with the eye whitening. And if you have somebody that's a little bit squinty or their eyes are a little bit narrowed, you can actually bring this enlarge eyes slider up a little bit and just make it look like their eyes are a bit more open. Okay, so let's see a before and after on this one. And I'm just turning the tool off, okay, so you can see his face is dark. Watch his eyes. Okay, so it's kind of like they're opening them up a little bit. And I'm going to scale this face light back a bit. Okay, so we've really enhanced his face well. The skin AI here is removing some of the imperfections of his skin, but it does a really good job in not removing the actual texture of the skin. Okay, so people have pores and things, like he's got fine lines on his face, especially with a guy. Watch what happens if I take this up to 100. Okay, there's a lot of sort of these automated portrait programs that soften skin, and they go too far. And I find that Luminar does a really good job of not removing. Can you still see he's got pores? So I'm going to leave it sort of in the middle where it was. And if he had any shine to his skin, which he does a little bit here, we could try and remove the shine with this slider here. I don't see any defects on his skin, but let's see what happens if I take this off. Okay, so what it's looking for there, let's zoom back in here. What it's looking for on the defects removal is blemishes and things like that, but you want to make sure that it doesn't remove any things like a mole or a scar, right? So it hasn't done that here. It's doing it fine. So it's really not doing anything. I'm going to leave it off, right? I'm going to go into the details panel, okay, like I did with the bird. I want to give him a little more detail and sharpening, so I'm going to sharpen him up a little bit. And I generally use medium details, sort of 20 to 30. Small details I want to use very sort of subtly on this one, because if you go too far with small details, the pores, which we just talked about a second ago, are your small details, you're actually going to sharpen his skin overly. Okay, so if we sharpen his skin too much, watch what happens. Okay, so it brings out all of those pores and things in the skin, which you don't want to see generally on a person. Okay, so I want to do the medium details and have him sharpened up. Okay, now the image is a tiny bit soft. Okay, so we could actually use the small details to our advantage and sharpen up the small details, but just paint it in where I want it. Okay, so I'm going to bring the small details up because look what it's doing to his beard. Okay, his eyes are nicely sharpened, so it's doing nice things everywhere except the skin. Okay, so I'm just going to paint in the sharpening using a mask. Right, and I'm just going to bring this up a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to mask and I'm going to paint in the details, okay, where I want it. So right now it's applying everywhere. You can see his skin is really sharp. As soon as I click on here on his hair, it's going to give me a mask and you'll see the red, okay? So wherever I'm painting is where those details are going to be sharpened. Okay, so I need to use different sizes of brushes. So I want to just avoid his skin. Okay, so I want to make sure that I get all of his beard and his mustache, but I don't want to get his skin. Okay, so I get as close as I can, and then I want to get the eyes and the eyebrows, like that. So I'm literally just painting in the details and the sharpening to these areas. Okay, so let's see how that looks. Turn the mask off, zoom in. Takes a minute for my computer to catch up. Mysterical. I'm going to add that to the Webster's Dictionary. Okay, so now we can see that his face, if I turn this guy off, okay, so this is off before the details tool and on. Okay, so it does a really good job of actually sharpening him up, and I've applied it just to the outside part, not to his skin. Okay, now if I want to apply it anywhere else, for example, if I want to sharpen, his shirt, I could go in and continue masking and apply it into these other areas as well. Okay, so I just want to sharpen up the overall picture without overly sharpening his skin, right? Like so. And I haven't sharpened the background either. Okay, now remember I said I wanted to get rid of this guy with the orange here, this red sweater. Okay, so I'm going to go into the color tool. And this one has done some effects here. Let's see what it's doing. So the template that I chose is applied some of these color sliders. Luminar is catching up with me. Okay, is there any other questions? So I'm going to be editing for about 20 more minutes today. Yeah, I can see that it's shifting the color a little bit. My computer is not catching up today. I've got lots of things running. So what I'm going to do is actually reset this one. And I'm going to go into saturation and dial down the red. Okay, now you see it's affecting this shirt down here. Then I'm going to dial down the luminance of the red. Maybe there's some orange in there as well. Now notice that it's affecting our portrait subject, so I don't want to affect him, but I do want to affect that shirt. Okay, so I'm looking only at the shirt, and I'm going to shift the color a little bit this way. Okay, so it's really kind of toned that shirt down, and I'm just going to do a same thing here. I'm going to mask so that this tool that I just did only applies on this little sweater here. Maybe this guy in the corner. Okay, so your eyes will be drawn to things which are bright colored, intense color, especially reds and oranges and warm colors. Your eye will be drawn to things of sharpness. Okay, so that's why we sharpened him up and not the background, and areas of contrast. And the more I look at this image, the more that this line bothers me. So I would either, I'm going to do a vignette and see if that solves the problem. because of the contrast between the edges here is what's drawing my eye. Okay, so that's definitely helping actually. Let's just come in smaller with our vignette, and let's move it down a little bit so it's on him, right? Like so. So that actually does help a lot. Right? So when you see that edge of the wall, that bright edge is attracting attention. And when I go real dark with the vignette, okay, because I've softened the feather, it's not showing up. You don't want to do vignettes that look like that. Okay, so you want to make sure that you don't see the edge. So keep your feather 50 or higher. Okay? And that's doing a good job. So let's take a quick look at the before and after. Okay, so notice that his face is fairly dark, his eyes are lost, and now he's the thing that stands out in the photo. Okay, so everything I do to this image is to help his face stand out, right? So I'm minimizing the red thing in the lower right, that shirt. I'm minimizing the background, and I'm increasing the contrast and brightness and sharpness of him. Okay. Curves next Wednesday. Yes, so that's the one that I mentioned that I did because people were asking for curves. So I did that one just for you guys because you asked for curves. Let's hop back over to Lightroom. Denise sent me a couple of different images, and she asked about this one here, if it was salvageable, okay? Because the bird, the challenge with shooting stuff like this is that the bird is backlit, right? So he's dark and the sky is white, right? There's nothing that's clipping, so we can, we can darken the sky down and we can recover some of that. We could also brighten it so that the bird stands out a bit more and give him some blacks, right? So that's actually, we're still not clipping the sky. And I think we've got some color fringe here. Let me just zoom in to 100%. Whenever you're dealing with a really white background or white subject against a really dark subject, and you go ahead and darken the highlights, often what happens is you get this color fringe or shift around the dark subject. Okay. The bird's not super sharp either, so I find that sharpening in Lightroom is actually not that great. I would try the details trick from this guy inside of Luminar and see if I can pick him up a little bit. Or Topaz Sharpen is actually an independent product that you can use as a plugin that probably would do a really good job on this one of sharpening things that are actually not sharp. If you could share a link to that video, please, Rob, on the Topaz Sharpen. I always want to say D-Sharpen. Is there a rule when I use a white vignette versus a black vignette? Good question, Nancy. Yes, generally I would use a white vignette whenever I want like a high key image or a light image, right? So for example, I haven't edited this guy in Lightroom, but let's just take a look if I want to add a vignette here. Okay, so if I add a dark vignette, okay, I choose the vignette based on, okay, how am I going to draw attention to the subject, right? So in this case, I would actually have to, brighten him up with a radio filter or something. So I'll just do that real quick. Okay, so I want more attention on his face, so I'm going to darken the edges, which are bright, to bring attention to his face. But if I go the opposite way, that actually might work here, okay, and I want to feather it a bit more. I don't use a white vignette often, to be honest, because it does tend to look hazy or fuzzy. But if you're doing like a studio portrait or something like that where you've got a white background, then I would use it, right? I can't see any of these images that I would use a white vignette on. Let me see if I've got another example. Yeah, I don't see anything that I would use a white vignette on. Generally, it would just be something that would be a studio portrait where I want the face to be the darkest thing in the scene. But great question. Right? The other image that Denise sent in, so just to finish with her little bird here, I would definitely crop it a bit because he's kind of far away. And when you're cropping, you want to make sure if you've got a moving subject like this, that he's got more space in front of him to move into than he does behind him. Right? So I would do something like that. Maybe even come in a little bit closer. Okay. because he's pretty far away. But you see how much of the image I'm cropping out. So when you're dealing with cropping like this, you're starting to cut away a lot of the pixels. So I don't know if you guys can see this here, but the original dimensions of the image was roughly 50 to 100 pixels by 3450. And now I've cut it down to 3660 by 22 to 80. Okay, so I've actually cut pixels off by cropping it, almost, well, 30%. Okay, so I've cropped out about 30% of the image. So now it limits things like how much enlargement you can do of this image, plus the fact that it's not super sharp. Okay. You might even consider doing something like a sky replacement on this one, because the white blasted out sky really isn't that interesting here, right? So if we go into Luminar, let's see if we can do the same thing. Right? I like doing these comparisons between Lightroom and Luminar because I can get to the same end result, right? Basically it's just, you know, different ways to do things, but I can get there often quicker with Luminar, and that's why I like it. So I use it as a plugin for Lightroom, okay? So I cropped him a little bit, and I'm going to use this Enhance AI filter tool because I want to see what it's doing, okay? So there's some weird stuff going on in the background when we do that. So instead of that, I'm going to brighten the image like I did on Lightroom, so that you've got more detail in the bird. And let us try a sky replacement, right? So I'm going to choose, make sure you choose something that's applicable, okay? Because a bright blue sky with big fluffy clouds behind him probably isn't going to work. Maybe a sunset with some orange, because he's got some orange behind him. So we could try something like this. Let's see how that goes. Okay, that's pretty dramatic. A little too dramatic, I think. So maybe something, we need almost a stormy sky. And I'm just kind of searching through them to see what kind of sky is going to fit with our little bird here. Lots of birds today. Okay, that's pretty intense color. Let's see. Maybe this one. Okay, once you've picked a sky, we can actually manipulate it a little bit. Okay, we're getting closer. It looks like he's up in the heavens now. Scott, that's not bad. Okay, so let's try something like that. Okay. Now we can work on. See, it recognized that the sky took up the whole image. Okay, we could move it sideways if we want to move it around a little bit. Okay, so that's not bad. We can use the relight tool. Okay, so the relight tool is going to take the sky color and apply it onto the bird. Okay. It's not recognizing a human, so that's fine. And I'm going to lighten that bird even a bit more. So now let's see what happens when I do this accent filter. Okay, so now it's really picking up the bird, but it's also affecting the sky, okay? And when I do the sky enhancer slider, it will affect the sky as well, so keep that in mind, right? So you could do something like that, and that definitely makes it more interesting with a different sky behind him, and try sharpening him up, right? Birds are one of the hardest subjects to photograph. They are really tricky. Technique-wise, you need to have the right lens, you need to have the right settings. Really tricky, right? So good effort getting the bird flying, because half the time that's half the battle, just getting him in the picture. Now the other image that Denoise sent me is this one here, and she's done what's called intentional camera movement. Okay, so if we look at her shooting information, this was shot at 0.2 seconds, okay, so just slightly less than a second, and she's moving the camera during the exposure. Okay, so generally when you're doing that, you're creating an abstract kind of image, and she asked me how I would process this one, okay. So same idea, I would go to templates first and see what it's going to suggest here. And I'm quite interested to see what it comes up with, because it's an abstract kind of image. So it's coming up with overcast, So we could try some of those. Okay. Oh, there's lots of detail in the sky. It's a sky replacement on that one, actually. So you could do a sky replacement, but it doesn't really fit. Let's try waterscape. Okay, so now that one's adding a bit of grain, which is interesting. I'm mostly looking at the colors because this is an abstract kind of image and I want to keep it abstract. But how are the colors coming out? Okay, so that one is actually pretty good. I like long exposure. So far we like long exposure. Let's see, Mother Nature, Animal Friends. There's another one under macro that might work well. No, let's go with the long exposure. Okay, so long exposure. So I'm looking at the colors. So this one's really bringing out the blues and the oranges. Do I want to crop this image? What does everybody think? Let's see what Luminar does with it. Okay, so I'm just pressing that button. Okay, so it thinks that I should come in closer. And I would actually tend to agree. I want to keep all of this bottom part, but there's some bits over here that I actually want to get rid of. Okay, so there's like a boat or something here, and then there's something else here. So I'm going to crop the one out, and we don't need so much sky. And I might even do more of a panoramic, almost like this, okay? Because the sky is really not adding anything. Most of the interesting parts of this image are down here. And let's see if it's going to correct the tilt. Yeah, that's not bad. We can play with that a little bit. Okay. Perfect. Okay. Now I don't like this thing here. Can you see what I'm looking at? It looks like there's something floating in the water or like a log or maybe even a boat. So I'm going to use the erase tool to get rid of it. Let's see how Luminar does. So remember, paint around it a little bit. And then click erase and let the program do its magic. Right? It did a good job. Right? So that just kind of simplifies and gets rid of that blob in the background. So even though everything here is sort of a blob, I don't like that blob. Okay, so I'm selectively choosing my blobs. I'm going to bring the highlights down, and that's going to affect this sky part here. Okay. And I might give it actually a bit more blue to pick up more of that blue in the water. And I'm doing that with the tint, okay? So the temperature and the tint control the amount of yellow, blue. Okay. A little bit less that and a little bit more magenta, I think. So you can really control the color of the overall image that way. We could also choose one of the camera profiles. Let's see what those look like. It's shifting the color a lot, so I'm going to stick with the Adobe one in this case. Let's do a quick before and after. Okay, so when I'm dealing with an abstract image like this, I'm looking for the colors and the shapes and enhancing them. And I might even want to enhance this down here a little bit by bringing out the shadows. Let's see what happens if I do that. Yeah, look at that. Okay, so when I bring out the shadows, we get a lot more of that texture in that bottom area. And I'm going to go quite high and maybe even adjust this curve that was applied. Okay, so curves is adjusting the shadows as well. So I might even get rid of this curve adjustment just by double clicking. Okay, so it flattens out a little bit, and I could play with the blacks, give it a little bit more punch, and the whites. So now we're really getting something that is colorful and really picking up this texture in the water from this movement of the camera. Okay, can you see that? So the waves themselves have texture, and then the camera movement. Okay. If I want to smooth things a little bit, we could do some denoise. There's a little bit of noise happening. But I think that's about all I would do on this image. Okay. We could play with a mood filter. So that's those LUTs again. I love the LUTs because it gives me an opportunity to just sort of play with color and see what comes out. Okay, so that Long Beach one that we did on the last image looks really good. It's got lots of pink and blue. Okay. And if you're not sure what to do with your image, this one looks good too. These will give you a great sort of starting point for playing around. Okay, so now we can really get creative here. I like that a lot. Okay, very cool image. So how is that? A video for resizing, cropping, and sizing for print. Yes, good question. That's something I would have to do because I did do one for resizing smaller images. Let me just come over here. I'm just looking at the questions here. How to manipulate image size. Yes, good question, Anne. That's something, like I said, I will do in a future video. So add that to the list, Rob. I can certainly talk about exporting or saving for print. Okay. The one big myth that people have when exporting for social media is that they worry about the DPI or the PPI, and it's the pixel size that you want to think about. Okay. I'm going to pop back over to Lightroom and share my screen again. Here we go. All right, so I did most of that one in Luminar because I knew that the tools in Luminar would give me more sort of artistic flair and artistic ability. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the catalog that Stuart asked earlier, and that's going to be probably a wrap for today. And if I didn't get to your image, if you've submitted one, I've got lots of images on file. I will save your image for next time. I've got a couple from Nancy and Evo and Tom that were next up, basically. And we're not going to get to these ones today, so I will save those for next week. In particular, if you have things that are different, like the astrophotography or some still lifes or some people, please submit some images like that because we're getting a lot of landscapes and we're heavy on the landscape and we want to try some other things. Macro would be great as well. Okay, so in terms of the catalog that Stuart was asking about earlier, I actually have an article on the website on questions that you might have about the Lightroom catalog. If you can find that one, please, Rob. That's an article on the website, not a video. Basically, the way that the Lightroom catalog works is that it's a database. Okay, so when you go to import your images into Lightroom, it actually doesn't. The images don't live inside of Lightroom. All it does is indexes them. Okay, so for example, over here on the left hand side, you see folders. Okay, this is the actual folder structure of your computer. So I can see that these images are in a folder called May 1st. Okay, and if I right click on one of these and say show in Finder, it's going to come up on my other window, you can see exactly where it lives on the hard drive. Okay, so it lives in the May 1st folder as it does over here. Okay, so it's the same folder structure. So all Lightroom is doing is looking at this folder, indexing these images, and making these thumbnails to display on the screen. Once you've done your editing of the images, okay, you can then export or save them out to the hard drive. So I haven't done that with any of the images today. They all still just live inside of Lightroom or inside of Luminar. And Luminar works similarly as well. It's also a database program. So the edits that I've done, I was actually working in a collection. So the images that I've done today, right, any of the edits, for example, this one here, are inside the database for Lightroom. Okay, so the way that that works is think of a cookbook or a recipe book and your food in the fridge. Okay, so if you want to cook supper, your recipe book has the steps that you need to take and the raw materials. It tells you the raw materials to use and the steps to take to cook that food, right? And that's what your Lightroom is doing as well. So anything you've done in the develop module is like your recipe for this image. Okay, so for example, I can make what's called a virtual copy, right, and it makes another thumbnail of the image. Okay, you can see that it looks exactly the same, but when I look at the image on the web, on my actual hard drive, okay, if I look at this in Finder, you can see that there's still just one image of this one, okay, 936. And you also see that it's unedited. Okay, so the original raw file still looks exactly the same as it did out of camera. Okay, so you're never editing your raw file, you're just making a recipe. So if I wanted to make a different recipe for this one, let's say I want to turn it into black and white, for example, okay? I probably wouldn't for this image, but just as an example, okay? Now I have a recipe that says this is how to cook this image to make a black and white. This is how to make a color image. And the settings are just different inside of Lightroom. And where these come into apply is I could choose both of them or any of the images that I've edited today. And when I go to export them, I'll just do a little example here. So I'm going to export a Facebook size, for example, and put it back into that same folder. Okay, so I'm going to find the folder. Lots of subfolders. Okay, and I usually make a folder called exports, and anything that I export goes in there. Okay, I also use an ending or a suffix on the image so that I know that it's a certain size. Okay, so in this case, it's a Facebook size, 2048 pixels. Okay, now you can see that in the export folder that I just made, there's the color version and the black and white version. Right. Just like that. Okay, so now Lightroom has taken those recipes, applied it to the raw file, and spit me out 2 new JPEGs. Right? So I hope that answers some of your questions about the catalog, Stuart. Let me just come back over here. That's pretty much all for today. I'm just going to see if we have any other questions. Awesome. Any other questions from the group? I'm going to give you guys a couple of seconds here, and then we're going to have to come to our ending. I'm going to keep an eye on my questions here. Please, if you've watched today, if you're watching live, please give us a thumbs up on this video if you've enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel and share it. Share it with your friends if you're getting valuable tips from these. We're doing these every week. Today we did about 6 images. Depending on how much work I do to them, we're getting through about 6 to 8 images each week, and I choose the images so we have a nice different cross-section of kinds of images each week. So if you want me to edit one of yours, please use the form in the description area below. If you're watching the replay, please put something in the comment area that tells me, what did you learn today? One thing. I want to hear one thing that I did that you didn't know before. So tell me in the comment area below the video. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep the images coming in and keep doing photography and practicing. Take care.